Our next speaker is Yvette Estwick. She is an education officer with the Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training. She is from Barbados. Her presentation is entitled Education for Sustainable Development, the Competency-Based Approach. Yvette is a passionate youth advocate with a demonstrated ability to effectively collaborate with local, regional, and international organizations to implement and monitor initiatives to improve learner outcomes. Currently, she serves as the focal point of the Student Council. An educator with the Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training for over 30 years, Yvette's philosophy is based on the premises that each child can learn if given the instruction they need. In addition to duties pertaining to the Student Council, Yvette is spearheading a project which uses a competency-based approach to teaching and learning to improve the numeracy and literacy skills of secondary school students. Yvette also functions as a member of the Technical and Vocational Education team with the responsibility for the beauty industry and is a member of the World Spa Organization, the international ambassador for Barbados. Yvette, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me, but my internet is not working very well today, but I hope that you will be able to hear and I'll be able to share with you this afternoon. I'm sharing my screen and I hope you can see and hear.
We can hear you, but your screen is now up. Please go into presentation view.
Yes. When we speak about education for sustainable development, oftentimes we think that the notion of sustainability is something new. Sustainability has been with us from the beginning of time. I think it's a survival mechanism. I was a teacher of history for many, many, many years. And one of the things when we looked at civilizations, there were always efforts to sustain the environment and sustain the people through actions that were healthy, that they passed information from one generation to the next and able to ensure that the civilization survived. So education for sustainable development is really a call for action, for us to look at what is happening now, for us to ensure that our society develops in a way that we can have a reasonable standard of living for all, and ensuring that learners gain the knowledge, the skills, the attitudes, and the values to build that sustainable future. And we want to make sure that whatever we do, that is tailored to meet the specific needs of a country. Someone mentioned cultural diplomacy. Let me speak of sustainability and education for sustainable development. It is not easy to take a model from one country and place it in another country. We have to tailor our sustainability efforts based on the characteristics of the population that we want to change. But one of the things that we are hearing often is that there are 21st century skills, there are new emergency jobs, and we need to get everybody upskilled, and it almost as an urgency. And as we listen to some of the other presentations, we heard the terms of creativity and flexibility and complex problem-solving skills, and that people must be lifelong learners. But if we look at those four areas, when we talk about sustainability from a historical perspective, those elements were there, that persons were creative, they had to move their work in tune with nature. And if the crops, there was no rain or the weather changed, persons had to be flexible. And they had to solve the problems of the day. And they had to learn as they go along. They began as very basic communities, societies, and we are very sophisticated right now. The new element that we are grappling with, we are learning, and I say new in terms of the last 50 years or so, as we speak about moving our societies forward, would be that those digital skills. And we want to ensure that all members of all societies are digitally fluent. And so what we mean? We want to ensure that persons are comfortable using the technology. For example, like we bring it home into banking, many of our elderly are faced with a new and an emerging way to access and spend their funds, one which they are totally unfamiliar with. So it means that if we want to sustain our societies and ensure that the standard of living is equitable and good for all, it means that there will be some avenue for upskilling and reskilling. So competency-based education and training, it prioritizes the demonstration of learning outcomes and the mastery of skills. It is the how. So we hear Janice this morning, she spoke, she was retraining. And in her retraining, she was given a diagnostic test. And that diagnostic test, based on the results, it looked at, for her ability to move forward, her skills, prior learning, her prior skills added to what she was learning would make her a brilliant student at the end. So when we talk about competency-based education and training, we talk about demonstrating learning outcomes, mastery, and gaining specific skills. And what this can do is that it can support our education systems and our employers as well to skill, upskill, and reskill the learners. I think we do have a challenge in societies where they're the elderly and they have to use the digital approach to the day-to-day activities. There will have to be some opportunities to reskill all persons in the society, not in addition to the elderly, so that they can be competent in the skills needed to function in their daily lives. So a key component of the competency-based approach is the integration of core skills. And they were mentioned throughout the workshop. We talked and we highlighted them earlier. You know, you have to be flexible, digitally literate, and so forth. Learners are also aware of the tasks that they have to do. And then the teacher is a facilitator. And at the beginning of the training, you know, it's clearly set out what it is you're supposed to do, and you become an active participant in their learning. And we can get back to the early societies. We learn at the feet of the masters. In Barbados, when in our early days of education, of formal education in particular, those persons who did not access the complete route of formal education, they went on to what we called a trade. And that trade allowed persons to learn the skill at the feet of the master. And they became an active, there wasn't any textbook, they learned through demonstration. In technical and vocational education, we will speak about grandfathering. You're teaching from the skill, the important task from one person to the next. But if the competency-based approach, it has been formalized. So if you're teaching particularly technical and vocational education, there's the use of the rubric, there's use of portfolios, specific tasks, and you measure the outcomes, not only against the class, but rather how the individual is progressing in learning this skill. And what the competency-based approach does, or it can help us, is to fill those gaps. We hear often, persons must have the soft skills, they must have digital skills, they must be able to move through the new technology. As I said, it helps us to build that capacity in our learning systems. And several countries have started and continued and improved. I think those in Europe who are with us, parts of Africa and the Caribbean as well. From our CARICOM, there's a regional competency framework. And those frameworks will dictate how the skills are supposed to be taught, what it's supposed to be taught based on our new demands. And if we look at our technical demands, how are we going to get our populations all have an equitable educational system, persons upskill, reskill, and having 21st century skills, have the relevant skills. It is important for us to build the foundational skills. But as we build out the foundational skills, we don't want rote learning and those maths, those English, and those digital skills. We want our students to understand. So you create a climate of collecting the evidence, aligning your curriculum to lead bodies, best practices, so that we know that if a student is supposed to be able to write an essay, you don't just write it, you understand the components. And you can use a competency-based framework where you give values to how well you write a topic sentence. How well do we use that to develop the paragraph? And then how well do you develop and expand on the ideas given and how you bring it to a close? It's very measured. Within technical and vocational education, and this is an area that I love, and would have retrained from being a teacher of history and social studies and English to really embrace technical and vocational education. And what it's taught me is that using a competency approach, you could almost teach anybody anything because you're not measuring their success against the whole class, but you're moving them through the skills, understanding where they are because you have a standard and you examine where that person is within that standard. And it speaks a lot then to how we train our teachers or facilitators, because traditionally, we know that the classroom, sometimes we don't have a lot of resources. So when we convey the information and we want to determine that our students gain these skills, we don't have all the facilities and the setting for us to really look at our students as individuals and to determine whether or not they're gaining the competencies. I think it would help a lot if our training systems for educators focuses as well as the traditional, but as we move into modern principles of assessment, you want to look at continuous assessment. You want to build portfolios so the students really demonstrate. You want to observe them and assess them based on the standard. But in order to do so, we obviously have to build up partnerships. Partnerships with the lead bodies, industries, educational institutions who can support or development. So for example, if we want to upskill and reskill your population at specific skills, you can look to businesses. You can look at, there are lots of online training institutions. Take, for example, some countries may use Microsoft and Google as their partners for the digital learning in the school, or those are the systems they use to communicate every day in the business. But embedded in those two companies are a whole training element that would help us to build out our soft skills, as many refer them to. And it also helps us to build out the digital skills in a fair and equitable way. Because then, in addition to what is happening in the schools or the institutions, the learner is able to use them and participate in a great way to enhance their learning. And what we have to do is empower our youth with the ability to gain those 21st century skills. And we come back down to those foundational skills. If we want to have societies that are responsive to the digital revolution that is taking place, we have to have our youth ready to learn. We got to empower them with those foundational skills. It is no longer acceptable, or it's not going to give the results nationally if our students are unable to read. The digital skills are poor from the sense of their learning gaps, and that we create an equitable and just system for them to develop the foundational skills. But there must be that intergenerational skill sharing. We must, young teach the old, and old teach the young to have the skills that will move the societies going forward. And that's one of the reasons I love being an educator, because you get to share with the youth, and they too share with you. And we talk about upskilling and retraining. Again, the competency-based framework, I keep speaking of the elderly, how we can get them to use the technology for those who want to, but also to learn and grow and still be able to share skills with the youth. I mentioned that the competency-based framework is well structured, well defined in some regions, in some countries. I know within our CARICOM region, we definitely utilize the competency-based framework for training and upskilling. And it's nothing new, as I said. We make sure that occupational standards, our best practice are well developed, but you have diagnostic tests. You want to have persons recognizing and seeing where they are, what are the gaps that are missing. And what I love most about having the framework is mentorship. So we talk about those core skills, those soft skills. How do we get them across? How they're important. But we demonstrate to our learners what is appropriate, what are the skills that we want them. And we want to make sure that our assessment practices, so it is okay to say, yes, we're going to do competency-based, but you must also have your assessment practices aligned to a competency-based framework. It is difficult for the results to be fair and valid if we say we're teaching on a competency-based, but you give pen and paper tests. And then in giving the pen and paper test, if somebody scores a high grade, yes, they're competent, but then they're unable to demonstrate. And we do that, and we want to determine competence by ensuring that there's the documentation of the evidence and so forth. but you're competent, so we understand, we're able to share, pass on the skills that are needed for the 21st century skills using a competency-based framework. And how do we say that we're competent? Traditionally, we will get your certificate, yes, in paper form. What is nice now, you have your digital badges, and there's a focus on what is needed in each society. And you have your skill-specific certification, your micro-credential. So if I need to get 10 data processing engineers ready, I know that I go to lead bodies that provide training, set the framework, and I partner. And I'm able to get my individuals and get my learners trained. And you progress, again, by scaffolding your certifications. Hopefully, we're able to move persons from a basic level to being a master of a particular skill. I just want to share, to say before I move on to sharing the resources. So therefore, as an educator, for someone who would have taught history and social studies and English in a very traditional setting, retraining and understanding a competency-based framework in moving individuals to master or develop a skill, I saw the benefits. I fell in love, because it means that you focus on the individual learner and you create opportunities for them to learn, and they're not judged. You don't judge them only in the class and you came 26 out of 26, but how well that individual is able to master the skill in front of them. And for further understanding, I look to UNESCO. What they have done is Education for Sustainable Development is very articulated on their platforms. There's a roadmap for education for sustainable development. But within the UN group of families and UNESCO, there's a whole reformation of technical and vocational education. And recently they would have had training on a new tech approach. So if there's need, you can utilize that resource to gain a further understanding of education for sustainable development. And it's exciting because it looks at policy, it looks at how you can transform your learning environment, how you can build capacity in education, how you empower and mobilize the youth, how you partner. And you take the ideas and you're able to tailor them to your own individual settings. So I just want to thank all of you for listening. And I really, really do appreciate the opportunity to share, and I'm enjoying the whole series. So thanks again.
Thank you, Yvette, for that very engaging presentation and tying in how education, especially formal education leading into competency-based education, is needed, especially within our diplomatic world, and the call to action, and showing us how we can learn at the feet of our grandfathers, which we have kind of forgotten throughout the years, and reminding us that we just need to get back there. So any questions for Yvette, you can raise your hand or place in the chat. But once again,
I do apologize, my network is really bad. I'm really, really sorry about that.
Not a problem.
Hi, this is Janice, and I have a question.
Go ahead, Janice.
Yvette, thank you so much for that wonderful comment you made about my presentation this morning. Being from the Caribbean, I have a question. As you know, sometimes in order to get what we are trying to get across to the citizens of our country, it has to come from a top-down approach. Are you finding that in Barbados, that there is any sort of effort being made by the current government, that's a party that's in government? So meaning is Mayor Motley pushing the efforts that are needed for some of the things that you talked about just now?
Janice, I see that you don't want me to be an education officer for too long, right? And I'm not able to speak policy, as you from the Caribbean know very well. But what I would say is that the whole notion of competency-based education is not new. The whole notion of transferring skills. And as an educator, I've never approached education from only a top-down approach, because as you're in the classroom, as you teach, you're going to recognize that you need to problem solve. We go back to the core skills. So if we want to be able to be an effective communicator, problem solves, bring into the relevant skills, you don't wait on a top-down approach as an educator. You recognize that there is a need and you communicate effectively to your leaders. And I'm sure that there's any leader, if you bring an idea that works or that can work, that they wouldn't want to see you excel. So in my experience as an educator, I've always been a teacher. By extension, I taught for over 30 years. I taught history, and my transformation from teaching history and social studies to teaching cosmetology in the school that I left was not based on an external policy, but rather with me going to the principal and saying, these students are brilliant. However, they express their brilliance through creativity. And can I teach the children something I love? And she said, yes. You know, this is the direction we want to go. And also, here, I give you my blessing. And so through leadership, effective leadership within that school setting. So I'm not a believer in only top-down approach for change, because change is going to happen whether or not you do something. You cannot do something, but what I like in my experience is that I've always been able to communicate that there's a problem and I can come with a solution and get the support and the solution.
Great response. I wasn't really advocating for getting top-down only support. It's just that I find that, especially with education, if the current government is not supportive of the ideas that are being put forward, like people like yourself, then, you know, as you say, you will have to then go into the schools and speak directly to the principals. But then there are some principals who will tell you, I can't do anything unless I get approval from the ministry.
I would say that Barbados is very, in terms of, as I said, I don't want to speak on policy, but as an educator, we are the middle in supporting our principals and answering to administration. And there must be some level of communication in terms of what are the expected outcomes, because it comes back again to that competency. what it is we want to do as a country. And those things are discussed in every educational organization throughout the world. What are the competencies that we want our population to achieve? And as an education officer, you must be able to critically think, be able to understand how best to address them, but also you are trained. So, and you're trained in a specific way. And you hire people with the appropriate skills in the areas that you want.
Great. Would you mind putting your email address in the chat so that you and I can perhaps, outside of this meeting, communicate? Yes?
Yes, I'll get the International Center for Protocol. They feel free to share my email address, and we can communicate.
Wonderful. And one last comment. I love your Prime Minister, Mia Mottley. Caribbean queen, politicians are concerned. She has done wonderfully well for projecting the Caribbean at all the various international conferences. Thank you.
Okay, we have 2 more questions and then we will wrap up Yvette's session. So we have Donatus and then M. Donatus?
Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah, you have been in this sector for years, and there has been a dichotomy in private and public schools. So can you please share a bit of the challenges you have faced in this area? Then the second question is, most underdeveloping nations are finding it difficult, especially from Africa, to gain admission in developed countries to acquire more knowledge. And it has been a kind of difficulties to achieve this. As an educationalist, what do you think can be done? That's my question.
So I'll answer your second question first. We spoke about cultural diplomacy. And I think there's always the division between the North and the South in terms of whichever systems is better. But I spoke to sustainability from the perspective that each society in its existence will have efforts that they would have made, or cultural practices or educational practices that are important to national development. I think what more must be done, you build capacity, and as I spoke, you build capacity through partnership. There's something called credentialing, where yes, you have your cultural norms, but that is aligned to international best practice. So you don't discourage your cultural practices, but you build an educational system around those practices. You remember I said I taught history and social studies, but I asked the principal to teach the students something I love. I loved it because I'm the child of a hairdresser, and I'm a child of an aircraft engineer, technical and vocational areas. And what it meant is that even though that approach was not part of the traditional approach, there's the value. And what we must do is to look within ourselves, do our own diagnostic test, set our outcomes, set the goals, and see where we want to go, and build the partnerships to build capacity. But as an educator, as a teacher of history, it's a recipe for disaster. If you take a perspective from another culture and you immediately place it in another and expect the same degree of success. We are dealing with diplomacy now, and you would recognize the challenges that we face, because sometimes it may not meet the needs, all the needs of the particular subject. So my suggestion would be, in answering your second question, would be building partnerships. You build partnerships with the experts, build partnerships with the industries. So you send your instructors and your teachers, yes, to be trained, but they return, and you design your training programs in partnership with the agencies and the areas that they were trained and the institutions that were trained, so that they continue to help you to build strength. But definitely, I don't think that you should just look in one direction for expertise without looking at them. And you want to refresh me on your first question, because your first one is a little policy, and I prefer not to speak on. So you want to, Donatus, remind me of your first question?
The first question is, I said there had been a dichotomy between private education sector and that of federal. So as an educationalist, what are those challenges you have faced in these two sectors?
I would say it is often assumed that private schools have more resources. And I'll answer a very generic way, because I do monitor in my ministry, I do monitor public schools, we're assigned, and private schools, and only those schools that we assist. But if there's a national curriculum, we can get those two groups even out. If the instruction is fair and equitable, it works there as well. So yes, we want within the private setting, in private schools, yes, they may have access to resources, but if in the public schools, we operate from a competency-based framework with integrity. We want to ensure that our students learn, and we partner with the private sector to build capacity to, say, for example, you build learning labs. So then you strengthen the public schools so that across the board, and that can be an ongoing project, because the businesses want the workers. And if you have a worker that doesn't understand and can't critically think and can't communicate, the output that they're able to give you, obviously, wouldn't be particularly effective. And only few persons are attending the private schools anyhow, and they may not even come to your business. So you would want to find ways that you can marry that and then build the public schools so that there wouldn't be that divide in terms of resources and approaches. So many persons always believe that public is bad. I don't share that view because of our own experiences in Barbados. Education is free from 3-4 years right up to university. And even if you would have gone to public school, or private school, you can still enter our university. So I know it 100%, but I'm very cautious in terms of our answer. So I hope that satisfies you.
Yeah. The area that I want us now to rub minds is the area, because I'm into travels, and we have a section in education consultants, and most Nigerians, we try to also gain admission. So I also agree with you that building a bridge between you and me will be a good opportunity in this platform. Just after this, we like us to have your email so that we, out of this play, we can settle.
Yes. So
Yes,
I'll
the
ask.
center, I will interject here. Yvette. The center will send out her contact information for further contact, or we will place it in the chat for further contact. So we have 2 more questions, and then we're going to wrap it up for this session. So M, on to you.
Thank you, Yvette. Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Yes. Thank you for that wonderful, wonderful presentation. I was just so excited because I'm in training, and seeing what you're providing was just not mind-blowing per se, but was very interesting and exciting for me to see that. In Africa, I'm speaking from Ghana, and in Africa, there's a lot of emphasis on IQ more than, or I say intelligence, more than practical education. And, many parents want their children to become lawyers or doctors or scientists or something. And hence this competency education it's not so grasped by parents especially. I recognize that in recent times, our governments have emphasized on STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education, and have introduced some vocational. How do we get competency education in STEM, or how can we incorporate competency education in STEM education as well?
I would say STEM is competency-based. You have to be able to write a program to perform the action that you want. So you can give me a test and I can tick the correct boxes. You can give me a multiple choice. I can write an essay on how it's done by learning it. But I can't write that program to open the phone or to move the machinery from left to right. So embedded in those, in STEM, is that persons have to be competent. You must be able to do. So many of the technical skills, many of the digital skills, many of the skills, you would hear persons are saying, some persons have a very broad view on your hearing it coming up. Oh, you don't need to go to university. You just need to learn particular whatever. That is competency-based. Now, there are some jobs that before you are even interviewed to the next level, you're given a competency test. Because what is important is the ability to do. As a teacher of English and history, I was so sorry that I didn't know so much about the competency-based approach, because I said I could have done better to my students. Because yes, I started to learn it, and I use a rubric, and I involve oral questions, and I was able to assess them using an oral for those persons who could not write, but having knowledge. It didn't mean that that knowledge is less. And we must be able to value our diverse abilities and provide an assessment framework for them. But again, back to my initial statement, STEM is competency.
Thank you so, so much. And I must also stick in there that I love Mia Motley, your president, and what he's doing, connecting Africa and the Caribbean. I just love everything that he's doing as well. So there's a plus there for Barbados. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Our last question comes from Georgina Chinwe. Georgina? Are you there? Okay, I'm not hearing them. You can place
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can now.
Okay. Yeah, I'm calling from Nigeria, and I'm working with Federal Airport Authority of Nigeria as a protocol and passages officer. Now, how do I improve myself maybe if he's running maybe a master's program outside the country to improve myself. Because there's no institution here in Nigeria that can improve someone. Thank you.
Okay, and very good question. When I have a specific portfolio, the Student Council, and when I wanted to really understand how to get into youth advocacy at a level that I needed to, I began to search online. So if you have access to a telephone and internet, there are micro-credentials, meaning training that is specifically geared for your content. You can find it, you can look on Coursera, you can look on edX, you can go on World Trade Organization, you can look at the ILO. And when my email is shared, if I can look and see if I can find any of those online programs that you can do, which will give you additional knowledge and competencies in the area.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any further questions for Yvette? Please feel free to place them in the chat. Yvette,